When I picked up this Bible, right away I could tell it was different from all the other holy books I had studied. It wasn't esoteric. There wasn't this appeal to intellectual snobbery that if you're one of the great enlightened ones, you'll be able to understand the meaning of this text. Rather, what I found was writing that was clear, it was direct, it was to the point, it was specific, and it was easy to put to the test. The thing that really caught my attention was Genesis 1 perfectly followed the scientific method. Now, I had been taught the scientific method starting in grade 1, and we got it every single year in school. But no one ever taught us the origin of the scientific method. It wasn't until I was 27 and started reading the writings of the Scottish theologian Thomas Torrance that I recognized that this thing we call the scientific method is really the biblical method. And Genesis 1 is one place where you see this biblical method laid out. I also discovered in this Bible repeated statements like this one you see in the slide. The Apostle Paul says, everything must be tested. Hold fast to that which is good. Several times the Bible says this. By the way, it's the only holy book where I found that statement of appealing to objective testing. And that really encouraged me as a young scientist. And then I got into Genesis chapter 1 and saw this scientific method laid out. It means you open up the first verse of the Bible and the second verse of the Bible. It tells you the frame of reference or the point of view for the 6 creation days. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of waters of planet Earth. That's the point of view from which we should understand the 6 creation days. And that's the first step of the scientific method. Do not interpret until you first identify the frame of reference. Now, step number 2, do not interpret until you establish the initial conditions. And that's what you see in the rest of Genesis 1:2. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters, and it's dark on the surface of the waters. It's empty of life, it's unfit for life, and the waters cover the whole surface of the earth. 4 initial conditions. Now, noting these initial conditions and the point of view, we can look at the 6 creation days, but step 3 of the scientific method, or the biblical method, is that we're simply to read the text to note what happens, where it happens, when it happens, and the order in which it happens. Then you note the final conditions, and then and only then do you come up with an interpretation. Then you put that interpretation to the test. If we could have the next visual, we see steps 5, 6, and 7. We can form an hypothesis. It must be an hypothesis that explains both the how and the why. And we test that hypothesis with further experiments. And what really encouraged me is to discover, as I read through this Bible, there are lots of creation accounts. 20 chapter-length creation accounts, chapter-length or more creation accounts in this book. The best I found outside of the Bible was the 3 accounts in the Quran, which contradicted one another. Here there were 20. And by looking at those 20, I was able to fine-tune my interpretation of Genesis chapter 1. In fact, it took me 4 hours to get out of the first page of the Bible. Why? Because there were 13 events of creation stated, and I had to get out all my textbooks to check out the veracity of those 13 creation events. And I realized all 13 were correctly stated, and all 13 were in the correct chronological sequence. Now, when I was 10 years old, I read a book on creation myths, and it described about 200 different myths of creation in the different cultures of the world. And the best that you find in those creation myths is the Enuma Elish of the ancient Babylonians. Describes 14 creation events and gets 2 out of 14 right in terms of the order of events, whereas the Bible scores 13 for 13. You know, what is the probability that Moses, the author, could have put these events in the correct chronological sequence if he was given them in random order? Well, you can figure it out while you're sitting there. It's 1 chance in 13 factorial. 1 chance in 13 times 12 times 11 times 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So within a minute or 2, you should have the answer. But far more impressive than the fact that Moses got the right order, he correctly described all 13 events. And those 13 events are something that could not be described independent of divine inspiration unless you were living in the 19th, 20th, or 21st centuries. So this was an example for me the Bible accurately predicting future scientific discoveries. And so I went into the second chapter of the Bible, and there's another account of creation with other creation events. I put that to the test and began to go through the Bible chapter by chapter by chapter, looking for other examples where the Bible predicts future scientific discoveries. And I found about 200 examples where the Bible accurately predicted future scientific discoveries. You know, there's a long creation account in the book of Isaiah, running from chapter 40 to chapter 51. And in those 12 chapters, Isaiah accurately predicted all the features of the Big Bang creation model, namely that we live in a universe that's traceable back to a singularity beginning, an actual beginning of matter, energy, space, and time. That we live in a universe that continuously expands from that point of beginning. Isaiah repeatedly talks about how God stretches out the heavens, talks about how he stretches out the heavens like one would unfurl a tent. And the word picture there is that a tent, the reality of the tent is the surface of the tent, not the interior or the exterior. Likewise, astronomers know today that all the matter and energy of the universe is distributed on the surface of the universe with nothing interior or exterior to that surface. Isaiah also goes on, with the help of Jeremiah, to describe that we live in a universe that gets colder and colder as it gets older and older. Now, what impressed me as a 17-year-old was to recognize that not a single scientist or philosopher ever wrote or described these features of the universe until the 20th century. And yet we got Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Job, and King David, and others describing these characteristics of the universe 2,500 years before there was an Albert Einstein. So here's an example of the Bible accurately predicting in detail future scientific discoveries by 2,500 plus years.